Welcome to Behind the Scenes. I am your host, Hector Montalvo. This show is dedicated to asking tough questions for you, the viewers. We bring you their responses, and we let you decide. Joining us here today at our MCTV studios, we are honored to be joined once again with no other than attorney Anthony DiFruscia, and he brought along with him his associate, attorney Renee Smallcomb. Welcome to the show.
Hi,
Thank you. It's really nice to be back, Hector.
Great to have you.
And I love your tough questions.
Thank you.
Okay.
You know, we try to go through the city to find an attorney who would understand the interpretations of the court. And it led us to your building. We came to you. Did you read the court ruling on the Solomon case?
Yes, I did, and I don't mind telling you, I'm familiar with the process. Having been a lawyer for 45 years, I've been up before civil service on a number of occasions. In fact, I represented the police unions in Lawrence, Methuen, Salem, New Hampshire, Pelham, North Reading, etc., and you're up to civil service all the time.
And civil service operates under different rules, correct?
Yeah, that's under Chapter 31, and my able senior assistant here has Chapter 31. As you can see from the book, Hector, it's a well-used book. So I think we have to understand the concept of civil service.
Right. Why don't you explain to us a little bit how that civil service operates?
Many years ago, in fact, there was a very infamous politician from Tammany Hall. His name was George Washington Plunkett. And he wrote an essay about the evils of civil service. And civil service is supposed to take out a public employee and make sure there's no political stuff happening to them. And that's how civil service really comes into existence. And the whole court decision is dealing with the steps to discharge somebody. And I'd be happy to go through the steps. And what happened in this case, in reading it, it's the normal process. If a city or town thinks that a public employee, like Chief Solomon at the time, was not doing his job or had some conflict of interest or otherwise goofed, they have a right to discharge him, to lower him in rank, suspend him, or any and all of those remedies. And they went forward, that's the city of Methuen, to do that to Chief Solomon. And they have what is known as a local hearing. That's usually a sham. Let's call it what it is. And when you go through the local hearing, and this is where the mayor would designate somebody, and at that time it was Mayor Manzi. And if anybody is to be the bad guy, I have to say it's Mayor Manzi because it's riddled with politics. So when you go to the fact that he basically trumped up all these charges. Some of them had some basis. And that's why the commission in Boston, which what the process is locally they make a decision. The town of Methuen said, you're fired. Solomon then, under Chapter 31, through of the Mass General Laws, I think it's Section 41 to 44, has a right to appeal that decision of a discharge to the Civil Service Commission. When it goes to civil service in Boston, they now have a completely new hearing. So they scrap everything and they start again. But the Civil Service Commission now has to make a decision on all of the facts, so you can bring in anything you want dealing with the charges. And their job is, does the local authority have adequate reasons? Now, the word adequate reasons becomes important. Supported by credible, believable evidence, okay? And then they weigh in on both sides, and credibility, believability comes into play. Obviously, Mayor Manzi at the time, now a candidate for some office.
State Senate for the 1st Essex District. Right.
I didn't know that, but nonetheless. Mayor Manzi's credibility, his believability, was tested. And Chief Solomon is no dummy. He was a police officer for years, knows how to testify. So the Civil Service Commission in Boston basically said, I believe Chief Solomon. I do not believe Mayor Manzi. And when the city of Methuen lodged over 9 various allegations, in fact, Manzi asserted 9 categories where Chief Solomon had violated conflict of interest with matters dealing with Sergeant Larry Phillips, improper disclosures to his private attorney where I think he sent his personnel file, which, by the way, everybody who's an employee has a right to their personnel file. So that's no new news. And
so everybody does have, so there was no illegal activity there?
No, no. I mean, if you want to get technical, Chief Solomon should have sent a letter saying, I request my personnel file. And he's entitled to it by law. So whether or not he gave it to his attorney, to me, is a red herring. It just is not a big deal. And I think the Civil Service Commission, when they went through the allegations that what the mayor had proposed, said basically they didn't believe Mayor Manzi, and they believed Solomon. But they also said, which I thought was interesting, because they suspended Chief Solomon. So instead of saying, Chief, you're fired, they said, Chief, you're off the clock for about a year. So they took what they thought in civil service in Boston, what the proper remedy would be. So the city's unhappy with that decision. They appeal it, and they appeal it to the Superior Court, which is their right. Now, what you have to prove changes every time you change the process, okay? So when the city appeals, it appeals on a very technical area. It's called a motion for judgment on the pleadings. No new evidence is taken. They just take it from the record, and that's all the testimony. What the city did on their motion on the judgment, the court basically said, look, civil service made a decision. We agree with that, the basis of how they made the decision. They're not necessarily saying, and this is kind of difficult to grab, the court's not saying they're right or wrong. Who's right and wrong here? They're basically saying civil service did their job, and there's an assumption here. And this is true in any administrative proceedings. The assumption is that the administrative proceeding did their job. So to try to overturn civil service is a Herculean task, having gone up there myself. The next step is if the city wants to appeal it. Now, you informed me today that it appears as if the city's not going to appeal it.
Correct. According to the Eagle Tribune, today's paper,
Yep.
It says that the chairperson and the mayor have indicated that they would not be going forward on appeal.
Their chances of winning are slight to none.
And I think the court stated that in their ruling.
Absolutely.
Didn't they kind of indicate that, look, you have no merits here?
Yep. The court was very clear saying that the reasons why the appeal takes place, there's no real merit because you have already discussed this before civil service and they made decisions. And credibility, believability is critical here.
Now, some of the accusations that were used, one of them was the illegal misspending of the weed and seed grant money.
Yep.
And based on evidence that was used in one of the cases, there was an email generated from a public official to another public official indicating that there was nothing wrong with the actual weed and grant funding. Why was that even brought up if this was known in 2006? Here we are in 2012, and we're still talking about the weed and seed grant.
Well, I think that you got to understand that the weed and seed grant allegation, you have the auditor, I think it was 206, you showed me that email, said everything was okay. In other words, no money went anywhere. There was no dishonesty here. And obviously, Chief Solomon the email was addressed to the chief, used that in his defense, which he has a right to do, which now raises the issue of Manzi's politics, and he would ignore that. That's his auditor. Obviously, Manzi was looking through political eyes. I want to just say, can I say something about politics in the
Please.
I don't mind telling you this. I view the fact that what happened was wrong, okay? The chief was wrong too. And that's why he got a little slap on the wrist. Whether or not the chief is competent to continue working now becomes an issue. And I think Steve Zanni, the new mayor, with a clean bill of health, because you can see the politics brewing. Mayor Pollard appoints Solomon as acting chief. Manzi doesn't like that situation. Maybe he wants to appoint someone else. So you see, for example, the backroom politics taking place. Behind all of this, the unspoken manipulator of sorts, but very astute fellow, is the Alamo family. And I think we have to bring that on the table. No one mentions the Alamo family. But they have been influential in town for years and years and years. And I don't put them down for that, believe me. I mean, all the more power to them. But if you're on the wrong side of the Alamo family, they're usually pretty good in picking the right mayor. And it seems to me that if you remember, I think that Mike Alamo's son was deputy chief who resigned. And when you go back and see the internal politics, the system has to change. Okay? I'm hoping that Mayor Zanni is going to say, why don't we sit down and talk about this? You know, there might be a nice, graceful way of cutting everybody's costs. Is Chief Solomon the best chief for the town? Is there a loss of confidence within the department? Should the city come up with some money to buy him out, so to speak? Because he didn't do anything legally wrong. And I think the decision in civil service quotes that. It basically says, you know, the chief did not do anything that was intentionally wrong. So the intent is important, and that also comes into play. Does that mean that Chief Solomon is not competent to do what he should have done? And maybe he should look into himself, or the city should sit down with Chief Solomon and first make the decision, is he competent? What does he have to do to become competent? He might be an honest guy, but it doesn't mean he's competent. And I mean, some of the stuff that the chief has done in the past, between you and I don't mind saying it. Look at Morris LaRivia. I mean, come on. When you consider the fact that here's Morris, the other city solicitor, that was accused of sexual harassment, as you know, and we represented Morris in that whether or not they should, the chief itself should have set up a video camera in the office. Is it because Mayor Pollard didn't like Morris and wanted to get rid of him? I mean, you got to raise the question. You know, if you take it to its nth conclusion, politics runs rapid in Methuen.
I tell you, it's a dangerous game.
It really is.
Really
and
is.
What's too bad is a lot of people lose deeply here. They get hurt, their families get hurt, on it goes. And I'm not going to say something negative on the Alamo family. I happen to like them. I've been friends for years. They're very smart. You notice that they faded away. And it seems the Alamo family, so to speak, was involved with all aspects of all of these cases, a little bit there, but not really up front. But I think Mayor Zanni should certainly consider mediation.
Now, you know, what about the conflict? Would there be a conflict there where Mayor Zanni had previously voted for a vote of no confidence against the chief? How would that come into play now? Would that be
potentially could be a conflict. I would not disagree, but I think that once you take the step as being the mayor of the city, that you should do the right thing for the people and set aside that stuff.
And the people are the ones that are getting hurt because they obviously they don't know how much their taxes are going to increase because there hasn't been an offer or a settlement or agreement at all. But let me ask you this. Moving forward, how should this be resolved? Should there be some private mediation taking away the city? I mean, how should this be handled so we can move forward from this?
Well, let's talk about mediation. First of all, mediation is where both sides come together and say, we want to solve the problem. The mediator tries to find common ground, okay? Because they want to end the legal dispute. And the mediator's recommendations are not binding on anybody, okay? So they can say, I suggest this, and either side can say no unless they come to an agreement. And you need a mediator that I could honestly say damage control, guys, okay? And I don't mind telling you that mediation works if you get a good mediator. So it could work. They could solve their problem. I think the city also has got to consider who controls the city solicitor. Should it be the mayor or the city council?
Well, here in Methuen, the city solicitor works for the city councilors.
Yep.
And which leads me to my next question is, who dropped the ball here? If the city councilors work, if the city solicitor works for the city councilors, the memo had to go out to all the city councilors in regards to these issues.
I'm not sure.
Let's say if it should have. Sure. It should have. Technically, if you're the employer, you should be able to get copies of the correspondence.
I agree with you. I agree with you.
Let's say that did happen.
I agree with that.
Here we are, 2012, and there's still no resolution. Who dropped the ball? Was it the city solicitor? Was it the city councilors? Or is everyone here to blame for this?
Everyone's to blame, including Chief Solomon. But I think the city solicitor's job should be to present to the city council the pros and cons, and I don't know that didn't happen as to what both sides of the issue are. And, you know, that's a fine line because, as you know, the city solicitor has to really deal with the mayor on a daily basis, so to speak. But the city council should be brought in honestly, and they should go into a private session because when you're dealing with any employees, that's private. But it's got to change. I mean, the city solicitor should have enough intestinal fortitude to be able to say, like we do, look, I don't think your case is valid. I think you have pitfalls here. Your odds are whatever.
Now, I know that the SJC recently came out with a decision that basically says that judges should not have to disclose or talk about what they were thinking based on their ruling.
You're talking about the Boston case?
Yes. So let me ask you this. If that is the case, what is your interpretation of what the judge was possibly thinking based on his ruling?
With this case?
Yes.
There's no doubt about it. They had a rule on the fact that civil service in Boston had enough facts and enough credibility to arrive at a factual decision. I don't see anything wrong with that decision. I think that if you look at the Boston case, the prosecution, the district attorney's office, got a little bit upset that a judge was kind of lenient, which, you know something, anybody can complain about losing. And the judge has the ability to look at you and make a decision. And I don't mind telling you that what some of the problems are is the legislature sets up these rules that say, let's take a second or third offense OUI, operating under the influence for ha-has. The law says second time around, go to jail, or you're going to go inpatient. Third time around, you go to jail. Okay? If you go to New Hampshire, the second offense means within the last 10 years. In Massachusetts, it means from the day you got your license. So a judge now can say, no, wait a minute, this guy hasn't been in trouble for 20 years, okay? You know, he slipped 20 years later. I don't want to put him in jail because the reason I don't want to put him in jail is it costs $40,000 plus a year to put somebody in jail. Do I accomplish anything? No. So I'd like to reduce it to a first offense. And I had that situation, by the way, last week. And the judge can look at all of the evidence and why did this happen and make a judgment call, which really has some humanity and civility, and say, I don't want to see this person in jail. If I don't want to see this person in jail, the only way I can do this is, but I want to teach you a lesson. You would drive under the influence. That doesn't mean you fall down drunk, okay? But like in my case, this poor young man, it was 12:30 at night, and he had a fight with his wife. He had 2 kids. He's an electrician, and he shouldn't have drank. But it happened 7 years ago in New Hampshire. So now the judge and I and the prosecution are saying that we want to see this guy go to jail on a second offense. No, we don't. He's married, he's got 2 kids. You know, the argument he had with his wife was texting him, by the way, every minute while he was driving to have him come home or something.
Now, let me ask you this. Now, we know that some civil cases do hold criminal implications.
Sure.
Were there any charges in there that would have held criminal implications?
These here?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. I think when you're talking about personal use of some of the resources of the town that allegedly Solomon used, yeah, that could be criminal in nature.
That could. But we also understand that in his defense, and the argument was that the city already knew that activity was going on, and they continued to pay the bills on that. So,
Well, they were both wrong.
Correct.
And who suffers from that? The people.
The taxpayers. Which leads me to another thing, because in this particular case, former Mayor Bill Manzi had asked the city council for indemnification in regards to that issue. We understand that state and federal law does not require, if a ruling comes down that this was politically motivated, that the indemnification is non and void.
Yep.
What does that happen now here for Methuen, and what does that mean for the taxpayers?
Well, I'm not necessarily going to tip off the city council, but I think the city council has a duty and obligation at this point to examine whether or not they should take back the indemnification, depending on how much money it's going to cost the city to resolve this dispute. If it's going to cost the city $100,000, that's why looking at the Civil Service Commission's decision in terms of where attorney fees awarded, I don't think so. I'm not sure. So, yeah, they could do that.
Well,
sure.
And in most cases, if the court finds that there was frivolous charges on there, which in this case, it appears that there were maybe 2 or 3 that we ran into.
More than that.
Then basically, the taxpayers should be off the hook.
Well, Solomon might have the right to sue Manzi personally if they take away indemnification. And I think you raised a good point. And I'm not sure Solomon wants to do that. So therefore, if you do go to mediation, I think that Manzi, as the mayor and how he acted, becomes part of the total, let's wrap this ball up and get rid of it.
Now, I know that you've indicated that you do not want to be city solicitor, and you've indicated that in the past. And let me ask you this. If you were a city solicitor today, what would your recommendation be to resolve this issue and move on from here?
Boy, that's a loaded question. What's the name of your show, Behind the Scenes? Well, I don't know. I get about $250 or $300 an hour, but I'll give this free advice, okay? Go to mediation, okay? And, if everybody can be honest about it and put their guns on the table. I remember settling the Salem, New Hampshire contract at 4 o'clock in the morning, the police union contract, and all the cops took their guns off. But by 9 o'clock in the morning, it was settled. I think you have to look at it. You have to say damage control and say, Chief Solomon, do you really think you're effective? Do you think you should get a little more education on what should happen? And a city solicitor, do you think that if you deeply feel in your heart that the mayor is asking you to do something that has no merit, you have an ethical obligation as an attorney not to take frivolous matters and bring them into court? And let's sit everybody down together. Maybe, you know, Mayor Manzi should come up with some money to pay for the city for all the time and effort. Should Peter McQuillan, you know, have that ability? I don't know what happened behind closed doors.
Now, we're not mediators, okay? And we seek to look for what's in the best interest of the taxpayers, whether they're involved in their government or not, because a lot of people don't know what happens in their government because they're not engaged, okay? If behind the scenes opened up an open invitation for Chief Solomon and the mayor to come in and resolve this issue right here, looking out for the best interest of the people, would that be a good idea? Would we qualify as a mediator to get this issue resolved?
That's another loaded question. Any more bullets in your gun?
You know?
You sound like a gunslinger. Anybody is qualified to try to bring 2 or 3 people together, okay? Do you have to have special qualifications to be the mediator? Yeah, you do, okay? Honestly. Because you have to take the legal issues and the cost effectiveness. Can you act as the go-between? Of course you can, Hector. Of course you can.
Well, we're going to attempt to do that.
I mean, you can act as that.
Now, you're sharp because you don't just focus on state law. You also do federal law as well, correct?
Oh, sure.
Tell us a little bit about the practice that people can reach out to you if they needed assistance, needed a sharp attorney. I know you have an associate here, Renee Smallcomb. What does she do for you at your office?
Renee is probably the best researcher I've ever had in 45 years, and she's a very young attorney who is very thorough. And her ability to cut apart things and check into the law is critical, because in a successful practice of law, you need somebody with a big mouth. That's me, okay? And Debbie O'Neill has a big mouth, too. Ross McLeod has had jury practice. My wife has the same amount of big mouthness. Now, Kathleen, to be very frank with you, used to be a law book editor. So she's a great writer. She writes really well. Renee's a good researcher. So when you put a team together, we always put a team together. There's never one lawyer on a case. And we talk about the cases. And I think it's important to do that. I don't mind telling you some of the... In fact, we got calls this week on 2 federal cases where an individual got his arm broken by a state trooper. And that might be going to trial at the end of... we're going to have a structuring conference in September. I mean, there's no excuse why a state trooper can break your arm. Okay, let's be upfront about it. And we have one in New Hampshire dealing with a young lady that got tasered, who was put in protective custody for 45 days.
All right. And really quick, if you can just tell us, where can people find you? Where's your office located?
Thank you for your plug. We're located in Methuen. That's the chief office at 302 Broadway. And I'll give you my phone number. It's very quick. It's like the Revolutionary War, 1776. No, 77, sorry. I goofed, and I see Nage there.
And the phone number is?
687-1777.
Great, and we thank you guys for coming in on the show to discuss it.
You've been a pleasure, by the way.
Thank you. It's always a pleasure to have you guys. You've been watching Behind the Scenes. Join us next time as we go behind the scenes to ask the tough questions, bring you their responses. We let you decide. Thank you for joining us.